He was just a single dad fixing cars by day and raising his daughter by night, until one rainy evening he found a woman collapsed in the parking lot of his crumbling apartment building. She didn't say who she was, only whispered something that changed everything. Before we begin, if you love stories about hope, second chances, and the quiet power of kindness, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more heartfelt tales to life. Now let's dive into a story that proves sometimes what we choose to rebuild can rebuild us in return. Single dad found a woman passed out in the parking lot. She whispered, "I own this whole building." The rain came down in slanted streaks driven by the kind of wind that crept under jackets and sliced through the seams of tired lives. Ethan Cole pulled the hood of his worn canvas jacket tighter around his face as he adjusted the small body bundled in a faded pink blanket on his shoulder. His daughter Lily breathed softly against his neck, her 7-year-old frame slack with sleep, her fingers still curled around the stuffed rabbit she refused to leave behind. He moved quickly across the cracked asphalt of the parking lot, dodging puddles and the glint of broken glass beneath the dim, flickering lights overhead. The storm had rolled in early, sudden, and unapologetic, much like most things in his life since Claire died. Just as he reached the corner of the lot, the beam of a security light sputtered above him and lit up something strange near the far end, a dark shape lying still against the wet pavement, barely visible beside a black Mercedes. Ethan froze. Was it a pile of trash, a drunk trick of the light? He shifted Lily slightly and moved closer, instincts honed by 100 small emergencies screaming for attention. And then he saw her, a woman, sprawled on her side, soaked through one shoe off her head, resting at an unnatural angle against the cold concrete. "Hey," he called out. No response. He crouched down, careful not to jostle Lily, and gently nudged the woman's shoulder. She stirred, moaned faintly. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her lips trembled. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, glassy and unfocused. I own this building," she whispered, barely audible over the rain. Ethan blinked. "What?" But her eyes rolled back and her body went limp again. He didn't wait. He checked her pulse, weak, but there. Her forehead had a shallow cut, likely from a fall. She was in her early 30s, maybe her face pale but striking even in its disheveled state. A leather briefcase had spilled open nearby pages, curling with water. A set of heels designer probably sat abandoned a few feet away. Ethan shifted Lily slightly, and with the strength of a man who'd spent his life lifting engines and hoisting his daughter, scooped the woman into his arms. She was light, but dead weight. Lily stirred in his grasp, blinking against the rain. "Daddy," she mumbled. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just helping someone." He carried them both up the stairwell of the aging apartment complex, 3 flights, no elevator. The woman's soaked hair dripped onto his shoulder, but he didn't flinch. He nudged open the apartment door with his foot. Inside, their home was clean but modest. A single-bedroom walk-up filled with second-hand furniture, warm lighting, and a faint scent of lavender oil. Lily's idea of keeping memories of her mom alive. Ethan laid the woman gently on the worn couch. Lily, now more alert, wrapped herself in her blanket and watched from the corner of the room, wide-eyed but silent. He fetched the first aid kit from under the sink. After drying the woman off with a towel, he disinfected the cut on her forehead and applied a bandage. Her clothes were soaked. He hesitated, then retrieved a spare t-shirt and sweatpants from Claire's old drawer and turned his back as he changed her carefully, respectfully. "She's pretty," Lily whispered. "She's hurt," Ethan replied. "But she said she owns this building," Lily added, cocking her head. She was probably confused. The woman stirred again, her lips moving soundlessly. Her eyes opened clearer this time, but confusion still clouded them. She looked up at the ceiling, then around the room. Her gaze finally settled on Ethan, who knelt beside her with a damp cloth. "Where am I?" she croaked. "You're safe," Ethan said. "You fainted in the parking lot. I brought you here." Her brows drew together. "Parking lot. You hit your head, probably a mild concussion. Do you want me to call someone?" An ambulance. She shook her head, quickly wincing at the movement. No hospitals, please. Ethan frowned. You're bleeding and disoriented, I'm fine. She tried to sit up. Her legs trembled. Just need a minute. He didn't push her. She looked around again, taking in the humble surroundings, the bookshelf filled with old tools and children's books, the cracked wallpaper, the handmade drawings taped on the fridge. This is your place. Yeah, I didn't think. This building still had residents like... She stopped herself, pursed her lips. Like me? Ethan asked evenly. Her expression softened. I didn't mean it that way. He didn't answer. Instead, he stood and poured her a cup of warm water, offering it without a word. She accepted it quietly. For a moment, the only sound was the rain pattering against the windows. I didn't catch your name, he said. Madeline, she replied after a pause. Madeline Hart. He blinked. The name tugged at something in the back of his memory. A billboard, maybe. A business article on someone's phone at the garage. Then it clicked. You're the CEO, he said, his voice low. She didn't deny it. I didn't lie, she murmured. I do own this building. That was when everything shifted. Ethan didn't speak. He looked at her with the eyes of a man who had patched broken things his entire life, but nothing quite like this. And in that small apartment, under the hum of a flickering ceiling light, two lives, one grounded in quiet resilience, the other shaken by secrets and storms, had just collided. Not by choice, not by fate, but by kindness. By the time Ethan woke the next morning, the rain had stopped. The light filtering through the apartment windows was thin and gray, the kind that didn't promise sunshine, but at least offered a break from the storm. He sat up on the old couch, careful not to wake Lily, who had curled into his side sometime during the night. The woman, Madeline, was gone. The blanket he'd placed over her lay folded neatly on the armrest. The clothes he'd loaned her were gone, too. He found the t-shirt and sweatpants folded with military precision on the back of a kitchen chair, along with a note scribbled on the torn edge of a receipt. Thank you. I won't forget this. M. No phone number, no explanation. No sign that she'd even been there except the lingering scent of her perfume in the air, clean and citrusy, out of place among oil and lavender. Ethan stared at the note for a long time. He wasn't expecting a grand gesture. That wasn't why he'd helped her. But her disappearance without a word left something unsettled in him. A question unanswered. A presence unfinished. Lily stumbled into the kitchen, her hair sticking up in soft curls. Did the pretty lady leave? She asked, rubbing her eyes. Ethan nodded. Yeah, before we woke up. She didn't even say goodbye. No, she didn't. Lily frowned, then grabbed her cereal bowl and climbed into the chair across from him. Maybe she had to go back to being in charge. He glanced at her. What do you mean? She said she owned the building. That means she's probably really busy. He said nothing, pouring milk into her bowl. The simplicity of her reasoning tugged at something in him, an innocence he both cherished and feared would be too quickly stripped away by the world outside these walls. After dropping Lily at school and returning from the garage, Ethan stopped at the corner store for groceries. The cashier, an elderly woman named Dee, was leaning over the counter with her usual conspiratorial expression. You see the news this morning? She asked, not waiting for him to answer. Madeline Hart's back in the hot seat. Some kind of scandal about that housing development she's trying to sell. The one right here. This building. Ethan froze. What kind of scandal? Dee tapped her phone and spun it toward him. A headline from a local paper flashed across the screen. Hart Holdings pushes for eviction of low-income tenants to make room for commercial development. Beneath it was a blurry photo of Madeline walking briskly into a town car, her face hidden behind sunglasses. She's been buying up properties all over the city, Dee said. But this building was built by her father, you know? Used to be a good man. Promised this place would stay affordable forever. Guess promises don't mean much when you're rolling in money. Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. He stepped outside, heart thudding against his ribs like a warning. The woman he'd found in the rain, drenched and shivering, vulnerable and soft-spoken, was the same person spearheading a plan to evict the only community Lily had ever known. And he had let her sleep on his couch, had bandaged her head, had covered her with his late wife's favorite blanket. For a moment, he felt like a fool, but then he remembered her eyes, the fear in them, the way she looked around the apartment like she didn't belong anywhere, the way she whispered, "I own this building," not like a boast, but like a confession. He wasn't ready to condemn her. Not yet. Back at home, Ethan found the briefcase she'd dropped the night before. He hadn't touched it. Out of habit, respect, maybe fear. But now, curiosity overrode all of that. He unlatched the brass clasps and carefully opened it. Inside were documents, real estate contracts, building proposals, financial spreadsheets. Some were marked confidential. Others were scribbled with notes in a quick, looping script. But what stopped him cold was a folded piece of thick, cream-colored paper. A blueprint for this very building, dated 15 years ago. And there in the bottom right corner was a signature. James Hart, Madeline's father. Ethan sat back slowly, the weight of it all settling in his chest. So it was true, this place had once been a promise, a project of hope. And now the daughter of the man who built it was getting ready to erase it. Unless she hadn't made up her mind yet. That night, after putting Lily to bed, Ethan sat in the quiet living room with the documents spread before him. He lit the lamp Claire had picked out from a yard sale and studied the plans with the same hunger he used to have in his college architecture classes before he dropped out to take care of his wife after the accident, before his dreams gave way to bills and bedtime stories and broken brake pads. He saw flaws in the redevelopment plan, areas that could be reworked, spaces that could be preserved. He saw possibilities that no one in a boardroom would bother looking for. And in that moment, something long, dormant, stirred inside him. Not anger, not grief. Purpose, not for revenge, not to expose her, but because maybe he had something to offer. And because the look in Madeline Hart's eyes didn't belong to a villain. It belonged to someone running from something, someone who might be looking for a reason to stay. He didn't know yet if he could give her that reason. But for the first time in years, he wanted to try, and that was enough to begin. 3 days passed. The rain gave way to cold sunlight, and the neighborhood returned to its usual rhythm. Children hurrying to school, neighbors exchanging nods, and the occasional sound of sirens humming in the distance. For Ethan, life fell back into its old pattern: work at the garage, school drop-offs and pickups for Lily, reheated dinners, bedtime stories. But underneath that routine, something had shifted. The briefcase sat tucked beneath his bed now. Every night after Lily was asleep, he would pull out the blueprint, James Hart's original plans, and pore over them. Not to find flaws anymore, but possibilities. He'd started sketching again on the back of old invoices and fast food receipts, reimagining what the building could be if someone actually cared. It felt pointless sometimes. He wasn't an architect. He didn't have a license. No one would care what a single dad in a threadbare apartment thought about urban development. And yet, he kept drawing. That Thursday afternoon, as he scrubbed grease from his hands behind the garage, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Cole?" a woman asked. Her voice was clipped, polished. "Yes, this is Adrienne Keller. I'm Miss Hart's assistant." Ethan stood straighter. "Is she okay?" "She's fine, thank you. She asked me to arrange a brief visit. She'd like to meet with you, in person. Today, if possible." Ethan looked out at the sidewalk. The light was pale and sharp shadows long. "Here." "At my apartment," she suggested the building. "Yes, around 5. He hung up without asking why. By the time he returned home and tidied the small living room, Lily was already home from school and had sensed his unease. "Are we having company?" she asked, tilting her head. "Yes." "Is it the lady from the rain?" Ethan nodded. Lily beamed. "Should I draw her something?" He smiled despite himself. Sure, sweetheart. Something simple. At 5 on the dot, a knock came at the door. Ethan opened it to find Madeline standing alone, dressed in a dark coat heels, clicking on the hallway tile. Her hair was pulled back makeup subtle. She looked different. Colder, perhaps. More put together, like someone who had put every brick of her composure in place before knocking. He stepped aside. Come in. She hesitated just half a second, then walked in. The apartment was as humble as she remembered. Modest furniture, the smell of something warm, casserole maybe. A lamp flickered faintly in the corner. Lily peeked out from behind the hallway wall, grinning. I drew you this, she announced, holding up a picture. Crayon lines formed a building with flowers on the balconies and stick figure people smiling in the windows. At the bottom, a small girl stood next to a taller man and a woman with long hair. Madeline knelt to accept the drawing. Is that me? Lily nodded proudly. It's beautiful. Thank you. Ethan watched the exchange carefully. Madeline was poised, but he could see the hesitation in her hands, the uncertainty in her eyes. When Lily skipped off, Ethan motioned to the couch. Have a seat. She did, carefully smoothing her coat. I didn't expect to see you again, he said quietly. I didn't expect to come back. Then why are you here? Madeline glanced around as if the answer was hidden somewhere between the bookshelf and the coffee-stained carpet. I wanted to thank you for what you did that night. You already did. Not properly. Ethan crossed his arms. And now that you've seen where we live, are you still planning to kick us out? The words landed sharper than he intended. Madeline flinched. I didn't come here to talk business, Ethan cut in, because that's what this is, right business. She looked away. This building is more than numbers on a page, he continued. There are stories here, lives, people who depend on this roof and the community under it. I know, she said softly. No, you don't. You dropped in, disappeared, and now you're back like you're doing us a favor. Madeline's jaw tightened. She reached into her bag and pulled out a document, placing it on the coffee table. I found this, she said, tucked in my father's files. It's a personal letter he wrote about this place. He wanted to preserve it, to protect the people here. Ethan's eyes moved to the paper, then back to her. So what happened? She hesitated. He passed. And the company passed to me. Greg Holloway, he's the head of acquisitions, convinced the board that this building was underperforming, that we could redevelop and profit, and you went along with it. Madeline didn't defend herself. I was young, and scared of losing what he left behind. I thought I had to prove something. And now, she exhaled slowly. Now, I'm not sure what I'm doing anymore. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Not heavy, not awkward, just real. Ethan sat down across from her, leaning forward. You don't have to prove anything by tearing down what your father built. She met his gaze. Do you believe in second chances, Mr. Cole? I do. I live in one. She blinked. What do you mean? This apartment, this building, this life. It's not the one I planned. I lost my wife, dropped out of school, had to raise a daughter with more love than money. But somehow I've built something worth keeping, something that matters. Madeline looked at him like she hadn't seen anyone in a long time. Not really. I have something to show you, she said quietly. She opened her tablet and pulled up a sleek presentation, digital renderings of a future high-rise Clean Lines rooftop pools, retail on the ground floor. Then she swiped to another file, Ethan's blueprints, the ones she'd taken from her briefcase that night. I've looked at your redesigns, she said. They're good, better than most of the submissions I've seen in months. You're not serious. I am, and I want you to walk me through them. Tomorrow. Ethan stared at her, not with skepticism but with something else, something unfamiliar, a cautious hope. Why me? She smiled, small, genuine, a little sad. Because I need someone who sees this building as more than a commodity, and because you saved me long before I knew I needed saving." Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing softly against the windows. Inside, for the first time in a long while, something was beginning. The next morning, Ethan stood in front of his bathroom mirror staring at his own reflection like he was trying to recognize a stranger. His hands were clean unusual for a weekday. Instead of his usual work boots and grease-streaked jeans, he wore a collared shirt and khakis he hadn't touched since Claire's funeral. They still fit barely. He buttoned the shirt slowly, trying to silence the voice in his head that whispered this wasn't his world, that no matter how many blueprints he drew, he didn't belong in meetings with CEOs. Daddy Lily said from the hallway, "You look weird." He chuckled, turned to see her leaning against the doorframe in her school uniform, holding her backpack like a shield. "You mean handsome, right?" he teased. She grinned. "I mean, like someone who doesn't fix cars." He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Sometimes it's okay to wear your other self. Are you going to go build a building now?" she asked. Maybe he said softly, "Maybe I'm just going to remind someone why it should never be torn down." Madeline's office was nothing like the hallway she had collapsed in that rainy night. It was sleek and angular, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and furniture that looked more like sculpture than seating. But what struck Ethan most wasn't the view or the decor. It was how out of place she looked in it. She stood near the window when he walked in, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. For the first time, she wasn't dressed like armor. She wore a simple navy blouse, her hair tied back loosely, no makeup except for the faintest gloss on her lips. "Coffee?" she asked, gesturing toward the tray on the table. "Sure," he replied, sitting down across from her. "I looked at your revisions last night," she said, sliding a folder across the table. Ethan opened it. Inside were copies of his sketches annotated in neat handwriting. She had circled areas, green spaces. He'd proposed a multi-use community room, child-safe redesigns of stairwells. "I don't know how you thought of all this," she said, tapping a corner of the drawing, "but it's exactly what this building needs." Ethan hesitated. "I didn't design it for what it needs on paper. I designed it for the people who live in it." Madeline nodded, slowly. "That's what makes it different." He looked at her, curious. "Why are you really doing this?" She sighed. "Because I forgot what my father stood for. Somewhere between quarterly reports and investor meetings, I started thinking of buildings as assets. Not as shelter, not as memory." "You were trying to protect the company," Ethan offered gently. She looked at him, surprised. "You don't have to defend me." "I'm not, but I get it. We do what we have to when the weight's on our shoulders." For a moment, silence hung between them like a thread of shared exhaustion. "I used to come to that building with him," she said softly. "When I was little, he'd walk the halls, talk to tenants by name. He remembered birthdays. He taught me that buildings weren't just steel and drywall. They're the sum of the people who live inside them." Ethan watched her eyes, how they glistened just slightly. But somewhere along the line, I lost that she continued. "And when my father passed, I inherited something I didn't know how to carry. I trusted Greg Holloway because he made it sound manageable, clinical, profitable. He told me sentimentality was weakness." Ethan leaned back. "Sometimes the world wants you to choose between feeling and surviving." "Exactly." Just then, the door opened. Adrian Madeline's assistant stepped in with a tight smile. "Ms. Hart, Mr. Holloway just arrived. He's expecting to meet you upstairs for the development presentation." Ethan felt the shift in Madeline instantly. Her spine straightened. Her face hardened. "Thank you, Adrienne," she said. "Tell him I'll be 5 minutes." Adrienne nodded and stepped out. Ethan stood. "I should go." "No," she said quickly. "Stay." He paused. "Are you sure?" She walked over to the window, looked out at the skyline, then turned back to him. "Greg thinks I'm still going to present his plan to the board today. He has no idea I'm reconsidering the sale. What happens if you don't go through with it?" She exhaled. "He'll go to the board. He'll say I'm emotionally compromised. that I've become erratic. I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to vote me out. Can he do that? If he gets enough votes? Yes. Ethan frowned. Then what's your move? She hesitated, then met his eyes. I'm going to present your design instead. I'm going to ask the board for a motion to pause the sale and explore a redevelopment plan that preserves the building's integrity and its people. Ethan's breath caught. You do that, I have to. Her voice trembled. Because if I don't, I'll lose more than the company. I'll lose the last thing my father built that ever truly meant something. He didn't know what to say. He hadn't expected this kind of courage, not from someone the world would label cold corporate unreachable. But now, standing there, she looked like anything but those things. You're not alone in this, he said quietly. If you stand up for that building, you'll have more than just plans on your side. You'll have every single person who lives there. A soft knock came at the door again. Adrian peeked in. They're waiting. Madeline nodded. Tell them I'm ready. Ethan gathered his sketches, heart pounding. Madeline reached for the folder and touched his hand briefly but with intention. Thank you, she said, for helping me remember. As she walked out, Ethan remained still for a moment, staring at the skyline through her window. The city looked endless from here, cold, towering, indifferent. But in one corner of that city, in one worn building still clinging to life, a single decision was about to change everything. The elevator ride was silent. Madeline stood with her arms folded across the folder containing Ethan's revised blueprint, her reflection fractured into pieces on the mirrored walls. Beside her, Adrian clutched a tablet and checked the time. Above them, the numbers blinked slowly toward the top-floor executive conference level. You don't have to do this, Adrian said softly, not looking up. I do, Madeline replied. You're risking everything. Madeline glanced at her. Then I hope it's worth something. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. The room beyond was all glass chrome and controlled tension. Around a long glossy table sat the board of Hart Holdings, 6 men and 1 woman, all sharply dressed, all older than Madeline, all looking up in mild surprise as she entered alone. And at the head of the table sat Greg Holloway. He rose smoothly when he saw her spreading his arms like a game show host. Madeline, right on time, he said with that signature smile that had charmed investors and bulldozed communities. She didn't return the smile. She set the folder on the table. I won't be presenting your plan today, Greg. A quiet beat of disbelief swept the room. Holloway's face didn't move, but the smile lost its temperature. I beg your pardon. She opened the folder, spreading out the blueprints for everyone to see. This is an alternative proposal, she said. It's a renovation plan for the Monroe Building that preserves both its architectural integrity and its tenant community. The room murmured. Holloway gave a soft, amused laugh. Madeline, we've been over this. That building is a financial sinkhole. We stand to lose. We stand to gain something we can't buy back if we destroy it, she cut in. Trust. Purpose. The very foundation Hart Holdings was built on. The woman at the end of the table. Barbara Weiss, the oldest board member and a longtime friend of Madeline's father, leaned forward to examine the sketch. Who designed this? Madeline took a breath. A man who lives in the building. A former architecture student named Ethan Cole. He rebuilt his entire life inside those walls. I asked for his perspective, and he gave me more than that. He gave me vision. Holloway pushed his chair back, face reddening slightly. We can't seriously entertain this. The numbers don't support it. I have projections, spreadsheets, comparables. You also have a scandal, Madeline interrupted. The room fell still. She pulled out her phone and set it on the table. On the screen was a paused video Holloway 2 weeks ago in a meeting with an aggressive developer, laughing as he said, "Let them whine. Bulldoze it. Put in a Whole Foods. They'll adapt." Gasps broke around the room. Holloway's composure cracked. "That's out of context," he snapped. Barbara looked directly at him. "You said bulldoze it." Madeline kept her gaze steady. This company was founded by my father to build communities, not erase them. If we destroy that building, we don't just lose tenants. We lose our identity. Another board member spoke up. You're asking us to gamble on sentiment. I'm asking you to bet on people, she said, and on the long-term stability that comes from doing the right thing even if it doesn't show up on a profit chart next quarter. Barbara tapped a pen against the table. Let's take a vote. Greg looked around, mouth tight. It wasn't unanimous, but it didn't have to be. The motion passed. Downstairs, Ethan sat in the small cafe across the street from the building, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee. He wasn't sure why he had come. Part of him didn't expect her to go through with it. The other part, the part that had sketched plans at midnight that had believed in her eyes, couldn't stay away. He checked his phone again. Nothing. Then footsteps. He turned. Madeline stood in the doorway, the winter sunlight catching in her hair, her coat still buttoned tight. But her eyes were different. You did it, Ethan said. She walked to the table and sat down, slowly exhaling like someone who'd just surfaced from deep water. They voted to halt the sale, she said. They approved your design for redevelopment review. He blinked. You're serious. I'm not in the habit of lying to people who rescue me from parking lots. They both laughed, a light, cathartic sound that made other diners glance their way. Ethan leaned forward, voice quieter. You're going to face backlash. I already have, she said. Greg is calling for a leadership review. Some investors are furious. Are you okay? She paused, then nodded. For the first time in a long time. Yeah, I am. They sat in silence for a moment. The city moved around them, but in that small corner of a downtown cafe, time softened. Madeline reached into her bag and pulled out the crayon drawing Lily had given her. I kept this with me, she said, during the meeting. Ethan looked at the simple picture, 3 figures a building, a sun smiling down from the sky. I think she believed in us before we did, he said. Madeline folded the drawing carefully and tucked it back into her bag. I'd like to meet her again, she said softly, when the time's right. You should, Ethan said. She's better than both of us. I don't doubt it. A server dropped off the check, but neither of them reached for it. There was something unfinished between them, but not broken, not rushed. Something being built slowly, intentionally, like a home, like trust. Madeline stood. I have to go speak to the tenants. Let them hear it from me. Ethan stood too. You want me there? She paused. Would that be okay? He smiled. You're not walking into that building alone anymore. They walked out together side by side. And though the city hadn't changed, something fundamental had shifted not in its skyline but in the story behind the walls of one aging building. A story of second chances. A story still being written. One step, one voice, one act of kindness at a time. The news spread faster than either of them anticipated. By the next morning, tenants of the Monroe building stood in tight clusters in the courtyard, whispering trading rumors, flipping through printed leaflets that had somehow made it into every mailbox overnight. The headlines were damning, printed in bold, cheap ink. CEO sleeps with tenant to kill deal, Heart Air derails, $8. 2M redevelopment, over emotional breakdown. Powerless or reckless, Madeline Hart, risks. It all. Ethan stood by the front steps, hands in his jacket pockets, jaw tight. He'd seen sensationalism before on TV and headlines he barely read at the garage, but this was different. This was personal, and it was a direct hit. Madeline arrived just after 10 a.m., walking into the courtyard with her chin high but her shoulders taut. She wore no security, no publicist, no assistant. Just a navy coat and determination in her eyes. A few heads turned. Some glared. Others simply stared. She scanned the faces and then spotted Ethan. Relief flickered in her expression. He stepped forward. This isn't your fault. She gave a bitter smile. It kind of is, actually. He said nothing, neither did she. From the far side of the courtyard, Mrs. Patel, a 70-year-old widow who'd lived in the Monroe building since it opened, hobbled forward. Her hands shook slightly from the cold as she spoke, voice surprisingly strong. "You came to take our homes," she said, eyes locked on Madeline. "And now you come with what an apology." Madeline met her gaze without flinching. "No, I came to say I was wrong, and that I'm staying to fix it." A long silence followed. People shifted waiting. I was raised in a world where success meant numbers. Madeline continued, voice louder now, where buildings were bought and sold like playing cards. I forgot that what really matters isn't on the blueprint. It's in the lives between the walls. The crowd murmured again. Some skeptical others moved. A few children peeked out from behind coats watching the woman who had once been the villain in whispered hallway conversations. "And the man who helped remind me of that," she added, turning to Ethan, "is one of you." Now they were staring at him. Ethan cleared his throat. "Look, I'm not a savior. I'm just someone who wants his daughter to grow up in a home that doesn't keep shifting under her feet." That's it. Mrs. Patel stepped forward again and reached for Madeline's hand. "Then help us stay." "Really stay, I intend," to Madeline said. There were no cheers, no grand applause, but heads nodded, postures softened. A wall not of brick but of memory and mistrust began to crack. Just then, a black luxury SUV pulled up in front of the building. The door opened and Greg Holloway stepped out. The air shifted. He looked immaculate as always, dressed in a slate-gray coat and leather gloves, his expression unreadable. He strode through the crowd like he owned the concrete. "Well," he said dryly, "quite the public sermon." Madeline squared her shoulders. "You're not welcome here, Greg." "I have every right," he said. "Technically, I'm still part of the board, and you've made quite a few enemies this week in case you haven't noticed." Ethan stepped closer to her, unconsciously placing himself just between them. "You leaked those headlines," Madeline said. Greg raised his eyebrows. "Can't prove that." "You don't have to," she said. "I know your tactics. Intimidation, scandal, divide and conquer." "It works," he said simply. "People don't like chaos. They like winners. Then they've clearly never met the people who live here." Greg chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "You're playing a dangerous game, Maddie. Sentiment doesn't build cities. Money does. And your little project, it's already bleeding." "Then I'll find a way to keep it alive," she said. Greg leaned in slightly. "We both know you weren't built for this fight. You were meant to look good at charity galas and smile at cameras. Your father, he was the real visionary. You're scared. Soft." Madeline's voice was clear. "Yes, I'm scared. But being scared isn't the same as being weak. You taught me to disconnect. My father taught me to care. I finally chose." Greg stepped back, the smile now thin and fixed. He turned to the gathered residents and said loudly, "Just remember, when this all falls apart, don't say I didn't warn you." Then he walked away, his footsteps echoing against the buildings. When the SUV pulled off, the silence remained. Madeline looked shaken, but she didn't move. Ethan touched her arm gently. "You okay? I will be." From behind them, a voice called out, "We believe you." It was a young father holding a toddler in his arms. A few others nodded. Someone clapped once, then again. Slowly, the noise grew not a roar but a quiet, deliberate rhythm of approval. Human. Real. And in that moment, for the first time, Madeline felt like she belonged in the very building her name was written on. That night, Ethan found Madeline sitting on the apartment stoop, her coat wrapped around her tightly, eyes staring up at the stars barely visible between the rooftops. He sat beside her. "You didn't run. That matters." "I've been running my whole life," she said. "I think I finally stopped." They sat in silence for a while, their breath rising in pale clouds. Ethan looked at her, voice low. "You said Greg was right about one thing: you are scared. So am I. Every day." She turned to him. Then why do you still try? He gave a soft smile. Because Lily doesn't care if I fail. She just cares that I show up. Madeline closed her eyes for a moment, then leaned her head against his shoulder just briefly, just enough. Then maybe she whispered, we keep showing up. For each other. For this place. No matter how scared we are. He didn't answer, but he didn't move either. Sometimes the bravest thing is to stay. And they did. The days that followed were quieter, but not calmer. Madeline's decision to halt the sale had sparked something fragile and alive in the Monroe building. There were hopeful whispers in the stairwells. Children drew pictures of a new building with gardens and libraries. A retired carpenter offered to donate labor. A teenage girl began sketching her own mural to paint in the newly proposed community room. But change, as Ethan knew too well, was not just about plans and speeches. It was about survival. And in the silence, the cracks began to show. It started with a knock on Ethan's door. He opened it to find Luis, a single father of two who worked night shifts and lived in 3C. His face was tense, jaw set. "Did you hear?" Luis asked. "Hear what Luis handed over a letter. They're raising the rent next month. 40%. Ethan scanned the document, heart sinking. It was legal cold, curt, and effective immediately. "They can't do that," Ethan muttered. The board approved the redevelopment. Madeline's working on a long-term plan. Luis gave a bitter laugh. Well, someone in management didn't get the memo. Across the hallway, Mrs. Patel opened her door. "I got one too," she called. "They're trying to smoke us out." Ethan's stomach turned. This wasn't just a policy delay. This was sabotage. Madeline was in her office, eyes red from lack of sleep, when Ethan arrived. He didn't knock. He simply walked in, rent notices clutched in his hand. "They're retaliating," he said. She looked up, startled. The management company, likely under Greg's influence, they're issuing rent hikes. To everyone. She blinked, trying to focus. "But they can't." "Yes, they can," he interrupted, voice tight. "They're exploiting a loophole in the lease renewal clauses. The board hasn't ratified your plan into a formal resolution yet. Legally, it's still in limbo." Madeline stood, eyes wide. "They're trying to make me look incompetent. They're trying to make you look powerless." The word hung in the air like smoke. She paced to the window. The city below glittered unbothered. From here, Monroe was just another building in a sea of steel and glass. Forgettable. Disposable. "I'll call a board vote," she said. "You don't have time. Then I'll go public." Ethan hesitated. "Are you ready for that?" She turned, fire rising beneath the fatigue. "I wasn't ready for any of this, but I've come too far to let them take it from me now." That night she held a town hall in the community room. Word had spread. Nearly everyone came. Ethan watched her from the back of the room, Lily curled up on his lap. Madeline stood before the crowd without notes or a podium. Just herself. And the truth. "I want to be transparent," she began. "The redevelopment is moving forward, but some are working behind the scenes to block it. That includes issuing rent hikes meant to scare you. Gasps, whispers. But I'm here to tell you, you do not have to leave. I will personally fight to freeze rent adjustments until the renovations begin. I've already started legal proceedings." A tenant raised his hand. "What happens if you lose?" Madeline didn't flinch. "Then I lose. But I'd rather fail fighting for what's right than win by staying silent." Mrs. Patel stood. "And what can we do?" Madeline looked around. "You can stay. You can speak. You can tell your stories. If they try to erase you, you be louder." A pause. Then applause. It began softly, tentatively, but it grew. Not because the people were convinced she could win, but because she wasn't leaving them behind. Back in Ethan's apartment, the mood was quieter. Lily had gone to bed. Madeline sat on the edge of the couch, her expression distant. "You were good tonight," Ethan said gently. "I don't know if it was enough," she replied. "It was real. That's what people remember." She rubbed her hands together. I spent my entire life trying to be like my father, but I never realized the part of him that mattered most wasn't how he built buildings. It's how he stood inside them with people. Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter watching her. He'd be proud of you. She scoffed, eyes brimming. Maybe. Or maybe he'd wonder why it took me so long to see the obvious. Seeing it late is better than never seeing it at all. There was a pause. A long, weighted pause. I'm scared, again, she whispered. So am I. She looked up. I keep thinking. If I fail this time, it's not just my name. It's theirs. All of them. Ethan crossed the room, kneeling in front of her. You're not carrying this alone. Not anymore. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, unspoken, fragile, and unshakably real. And in the quiet, she leaned her forehead against his. Not a kiss, not yet. Just the comfort of shared battlefields. But while the tenants slept that night beneath patched roofs and hopeful dreams in a glossy office on the other side of town, Greg Holloway was already 3 steps ahead. He stood at a private bar with 2 men from the investment group backing the original redevelopment. In his hand he held a file, Ethan's file. Single father, high school diploma, former student at Seattle Tech, never finished. No license, no permits. He dropped the file on the bar. Tomorrow morning, Greg said, we remind the city what happens when amateurs try to play architect. He raised his glass in a silent toast. And smiled. Beneath the surface of hope, the storm hadn't passed. It had only paused. But this time, they wouldn't face it alone. The headlines came the next morning, sharp as blades. Unlicensed man. Behind Hart Holdings, redevelopment plan. Single father with no credentials. Is Monroe's future, built on false promises. From grease to glass. CEO's risky bet on a mechanic turned architect. Ethan stared at the articles in disbelief, coffee cooling in his hand. His phone buzzed endlessly, friends from the garage, messages from neighbors, even Lily's school had called to ask about the media situation. He turned off the phone. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was betrayal. The photos they used were grainy, one from the garage, one taken without his consent at the town hall. He looked like exactly what they wanted him to be, a man pretending to belong in a world too far above him. The knock on the door was inevitable. Madeline stood there breathless, her coat unbuttoned, a folder in her hand. Ethan. He didn't let her in right away. He stood in the doorway, one hand braced against the frame. You knew this would happen, he said quietly. I didn't know they had a file on you, but you knew Greg would go for blood. Madeline looked down, shame-painting shadows beneath her eyes. I thought if I stayed ahead, if I kept pushing the vote, filed the motions, he wouldn't have time. Well, Ethan said, voice bitter, he made time. She tried to hand him the folder. I filed an official complaint with the press board and the housing committee. They're investigating the leak. He didn't take it. And what do you think that changes? He asked. You told everyone my design would save this place, and now they know it came from someone who on paper isn't qualified to design a doghouse. Madeline's voice trembled. Your work is more than qualified. But I'm not, am I? The words hung heavy. Lily peeked out from her bedroom. Her eyes were wide, quiet. Madeline followed his gaze and swallowed hard. I didn't come here to fix this with papers, Ethan. I came because none of this works without you. He closed his eyes, and for a long moment neither of them moved. I can't protect you from the whole world, she whispered. I wasn't asking you to, he said. I just needed you to believe I belonged in it. He didn't go to the garage that day. Instead, he took Lily to the park near the edge of the city, the one Claire used to bring her to when she was still strong enough to walk without pain. The swings were faded now. The benches were chipped, but the air was still honest. Lily swung her legs quietly beside him. She didn't ask why he wasn't at work. Did you build our building? She asked finally. Ethan shook his head. No, baby. I just helped to draw something better for it. Then why are people saying mean things about you? He looked up at the sky. Because sometimes when you try to change something, the people who liked it broken get scared. Lily thought about this. But your drawings were nice. And the lady said they were smart. He looked at her. She did. And I don't care if they said you didn't finish school. You finished my room. He smiled through the sting in his eyes. Yeah, she nodded. And you made it warm. That night he returned to his apartment alone after Lily had gone to a sleepover. The place was quiet. Still. And on his kitchen table sat the original blueprint James Hart had drawn, the one Ethan had studied like scripture. He looked at it now, not as a technician or an employee or a hopeful, but as a father. As a man who had once thought he'd lost the right to dream. And then without ceremony he sat down and began to sketch again. This time not to prove anything. Not to the board. Not to Madeline. Not to Greg. But to himself. At the same time, across the city, Madeline faced a different storm. The boardroom was quieter than usual, but the pressure in the air was deafening. Greg sat at the far end of the table, hands folded, smiling like a man who'd already won. Barbara Weiss looked between them. This smear campaign targeting Mr. Cole was this from your office. Mr. Holloway, Greg's smile didn't falter. Information found in public record. We simply compiled it. The public has a right to transparency, especially when unlicensed individuals are shaping multi-million-dollar assets. Barbara turned to Madeline. Your response. Madeline stood slowly. Her voice didn't waver. I don't deny the facts. Mr. Cole isn't licensed, but what he has, what none of us have, is a lived experience of the Monroe Building. He understands it from the inside. He earned every line on that sketch not in classrooms but in sacrifice. Another board member scoffed. And you're willing to stake your name on him. She nodded. I already did. And I'll do it again. A beat of silence. Barbara tapped her pen twice. Then I believe we should hear directly from Mr. Cole. Set a formal meeting. Greg leaned back, visibly irritated. Or we could cancel the entire circus. No, Barbara said sharply, because sometimes the heart behind the plan matters more than the title on the degree. Later that evening, Ethan found a letter taped to his door. Inside was a simple note in Madeline's handwriting. They're calling a meeting. They want to hear from you. For real this time. Not as a risk, but as a voice. You decide whether you want to speak. I'll back you either way. M. And at the bottom, in Lily's handwriting, her unmistakable scrawl, You build good things, Daddy. Ethan held the note for a long time. Then he picked up his coat and turned the light back on. The boardroom didn't look so intimidating the second time, just expensive. Ethan stood outside its glass doors holding a leather folder Lily had insisted he carry. Inside were his blueprints, some printed, some hand-drawn edges, still frayed from nights he'd spent sketching them on his kitchen floor. He wore a clean shirt, same one from the night of the town hall. His hands were shaking, but his feet weren't. Across from him, Madeline stood quietly watching him with a kind of steadiness he didn't yet believe he'd earned. You don't have to be anything you're not, she said softly. I know, he replied. She hesitated. Whatever happens, you've already changed something, even if they don't see it. He gave her a half-smile. They will. Madeline reached for the door. You ready? No, he said honestly, but I'm here. She opened the door. Inside, the board members sat in their usual seats. Greg Holloway, arms folded, smirked the moment Ethan stepped in. Barbara Weiss gave a brief nod, as did two others, but most wore the expression of people expecting to be unimpressed. Ethan walked to the head of the table, placed his folder down, and opened it. He didn't clear his throat, didn't look at Madeline for a signal. He simply looked around the room. My name is Ethan Cole. I've lived in the Monroe Building for 10 years. Raised my daughter there. Lost my wife there. Fixed leaky pipes when no one came. Helped neighbors when the elevators broke. Built bunk beds from salvaged lumber. I know every crack in the wall and what it means. He paused. I'm not licensed. You all know that. But I was 2 years into an architecture degree before life pulled me in another direction. That doesn't make me less capable. It makes me more committed." He held up the main blueprint. "This is the building you wanted to replace with a glass tower. A structure built by Madeline's father, someone who believed in dignity and shelter. You wanted to erase it. I wanted to evolve it." He pointed to the plans. "We're not proposing luxury. We're proposing livability, community, efficiency. Design that's not just beautiful, but belonging." Greg scoffed audibly. "Mr. Cole, with all due respect, your story doesn't build equity. This is a business." Ethan turned to him calmly. "You're right, it is. But what you seem to forget is that people stay in communities that feel human. That is good business. People talk. Cities listen. If you flatten this building, you'll lose the people. You'll lose the story. And in 5 years, it'll be just another development with a vacancy problem." Barbara raised her hand gently. "What are you asking of us?" Ethan took a breath. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for a chance. A trial period. Let us begin. Phase 1, refurbishing the East Wing. If after 6 months occupancy improves, community involvement rises, and costs stay sustainable, we continue. If not, you go back to the drawing board." Another board member leaned forward. "You'd do that? Put your design on the line." "I already did," Ethan said. "Every night I stayed up working on it. Every floorboard I imagined Lily walking across. I don't need a title to care about the people who live beneath my own ceiling." The room fell quiet. Madeline watched the board heart pounding. For once, she didn't speak, didn't steer. She just let truth do the talking. After a long minute, Barbara tapped her pen. "I move to vote on the Phase 1 pilot proposal led by Mr. Cole under the supervision of an accredited architect of our choosing." "Seconded," said another voice. Greg looked furious. But the votes began to tally. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Majority. Madeline exhaled. Ethan didn't react, at least not outwardly. He simply nodded once as though he'd just closed the hood on a perfectly repaired engine. Greg stood up, voice icy. "This company is no longer about excellence. It's about charity." Madeline stood too, her voice steady. "This company is about impact. My father knew that, and so do I." Greg stormed out. Outside, Ethan stepped into the afternoon light. He didn't say anything for a moment. Madeline followed behind, silent until they reached the street. "You did it," she said quietly. He turned to her, eyes soft. "No, we did." She looked down, then back up. "You knew exactly what to say. I didn't plan it. I just told the truth." A pause. "Why didn't you look at me in the room?" she asked. "Because I needed to believe I belonged there." "First," he replied. She nodded, her expression unreadable. "And now?" "Now," he said, stepping closer, "I believe it." The city moved around them, horns, honking people, rushing dogs, barking. But in that sliver of sidewalk, a quiet clarity held them still. "I want to build something real," he said. "Not just walls and windows. Something we don't run from." Madeline's eyes searched his. "With me, with you," he said. "If you're ready for something that doesn't come with a manual." She smiled, a small vulnerable curve of her lips. "No blueprints." He shook his head. "Just heart." She took his hand, and this time neither of them let go. The east wing of the Monroe Building was quieter than usual that morning. Not silent, never silent in a place filled with children and the daily churn of ordinary lives, but quieter in a way that suggested something new was about to begin. Ethan stood in front of the entrance blueprints under one arm, coffee in hand, and a sense of responsibility in his chest that felt heavier and more sacred than ever before. He looked up at the weathered brick, the faded paint around the windowsills, the rusting balconies that had held decades of flower pots, laundry lines, and whispered conversations. He knew every inch of it. But today, he would not simply walk through it. Today, he would lead its transformation. The first day of Phase 1 renovations began not with machinery, but with a community meeting in the old laundry room. Ethan and Madeline had transformed the space-folding chairs arranged in a circle, posters with sketches of the new designs hung on the wall, snacks for the kids, and plenty of fresh coffee. The room filled quickly, not just with tenants but with volunteers, a retired plumber from 4B, 2 college students from the community center, even a local hardware store owner who offered discounted supplies. They didn't come for the paycheck. They came because something was finally happening, and they wanted to be a part of it. Ethan stood at the front, nervous, until Lily appeared beside him and took his hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. He smiled down at her, then turned to the crowd. "Most of you already know me," he began. "But today, I'm not just your neighbor. I'm your project manager. And more importantly, I'm your listener." The crowd chuckled, warm and supportive. "We're not here to change your home into something unrecognizable. We're here to make it stronger, safer, more dignified. With your help." Madeline stepped forward, then her voice clear. "We're starting with this wing. New flooring, safer stairwells, better lighting, and a shared courtyard where the parking lot used to be. If this works, the rest of the building follows. But we need your feedback every step of the way. And this isn't a top-down project. This is a side-by-side rebuild." Mrs. Patel raised her hand. "Will you fix the elevator?" Ethan grinned. "Yes, ma'am. That's day 3. She nodded, satisfied. "Good. I'm too old for 5 flights of guilt." Laughter rippled through the room. And something else, too, belonging. In the following days, the East Wing blossomed not just in construction, but in spirit. Walls were repainted by teenagers who'd never held a brush. Elderly residents supervised with gentle critique and surprising humor. The courtyard plans were adjusted based on suggestions from single moms who wanted safer play areas and from a former Army medic who offered to design a small first aid station. Ethan walked from unit to unit with his folder, accepting feedback, updating measurements, solving problems. He wore a reflective vest over his old work boots and carried a pencil behind his ear like a badge of quiet pride. Everywhere he went, people called him by name. "Ethan, come check this crack in the foundation." "Hey, Ethan, the lights on the 3rd floor keep flickering." "Ethan, I found your daughter drawing murals on the walls again." He laughed at that last one. Lily had claimed a spot just off the stairwell, sketching a rising sun with flowers reaching up toward it. Her crayons were scattered on the floor, her brow furrowed in focus. "You're not supposed to draw on the walls, kiddo," he said gently. She looked up, undeterred. "But we're rebuilding, right?" He knelt beside her. "Yes, but usually on paper." She pointed to the drawing. "This is for everyone to see, like a promise." Ethan stared at it for a moment, heart full. "Okay, but one mural." Deal, she said, and went right back to coloring. That evening, Ethan and Madeline sat on a makeshift bench in the courtyard, now just gravel and flagged-off construction zones, but somehow already transformed by intent. They sipped tea from mismatched mugs, watching the sky burn orange behind the skyline. "You've done more in a week than we managed in a year," Madeline said. "You gave us a reason to try," he replied. She smiled, but her eyes were tired. "You know Greg's still not done right." Ethan nodded. "I know. He's working behind the scenes, trying to rally a vote of no confidence. He's betting this won't last. That will burn out." Ethan looked around at the workers still finishing up, at the teenager handing out bottled water, at the elderly man repairing a railing with one hand and a cane in the other. "We're still here," he said, "and we're not going anywhere." Madeline turned to him, her voice quieter. "You're not just building a place, Ethan. You're building trust, and that's harder than brick." He shrugged. "Guess I've learned to start with what's broken." She looked at him, and there it was again, that gentle, unspoken connection neither had tried to define. Not yet, but it was growing, like roots under the foundation. That night, the East Wing glowed, not with fancy lights or designer decor, but with the soft illumination of repaired bulbs, laughter through open windows, and footsteps on newly secured stairwells. Ethan stood at the threshold, looking back one last time before heading home. It still needed work, a lot of it, but it was beginning to resemble what he had dreamed of in those late, quiet nights, a place that protected its people, not pushed them out. A place worthy of being called home. He pulled out his pencil and scribbled one final note on his clipboard. This building doesn't need to be new, it just needs to remember who it's for. And then he walked back to Lily, to Madeline, and to whatever came next. Because sometimes the greatest rebuild starts from the inside out. Winter came gently that year, not with blizzards or bitter winds, but with the kind of stillness that settles into a neighborhood after the noise fades, after the hard work is done. Snow dusted the rooftops of the Monroe building like powdered sugar. The scaffolding was finally gone. The east wing was complete. The other sections, once crumbling now promising, were well underway. Inside apartment 2A, Ethan stood by the window holding a mug of coffee, watching Lily chase snowflakes in the courtyard with the neighbor kids. She wore a red scarf too big for her neck and boots that squeaked when she ran, but her laughter echoed up the brick walls like a hymn. Behind him, soft footsteps approached. Madeline's hand slid around his waist, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. "She looks happy," she said. "She is," Ethan replied. "She keeps saying this is the best winter ever." Madeline smiled. "She's not the only one." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching their little world move gently beneath them. "So," she said softly, "are you ready for tonight?" Ethan looked at her bemused. "Ready to be honored at a City Hall gala I never asked to be part of, not even a little." Madeline laughed. "Too bad. You're the face of community redevelopment now." He groaned. "Do I have to make a speech?" She kissed his cheek. "Only if you want to make me cry in public." "Tempting," he said. But no. The gala was a modest affair held in the old city theater turned community space. No red carpet, just warm lights and hand-painted signs made by children from the neighborhood. The banner read, "Celebrating the Heart Behind the Walls." Ethan arrived with Madeline and Lily, who wore a sparkly dress and insisted on bringing a drawing to give to the mayor. It showed the Monroe building with cartoon people smiling out every window. Ethan, Madeline, and Lily stood together at the center, arms linked. Above them, in bold crayon, "Home is who stays." The room was packed, residents, local officials, volunteers, families. Many had shown up simply to say thank you, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Barbara Weiss took the small stage, first leaning on her cane with the poise of someone who had seen many things rise and fall in the city and chose to stand with what rose from kindness. This building, she began, was once slated for demolition. It was marked as underperforming, outdated, and irrelevant. But instead of tearing it down, we witnessed something extraordinary, people choosing to build forward, not just with tools, but with heart. She turned toward Ethan and Madeline. "Tonight, we honor not the structure, but the soul of what was saved, and who saved it." Ethan was invited up. He resisted, then relented when Lily shoved him gently from behind and whispered, "Go on, Daddy." The applause was warm. No flashes, no microphones, just a quiet expectation of sincerity. Ethan stepped to the front, looking down at the drawing in his hand, then out at the sea of familiar faces. "I used to think I lost my blueprint when my wife died," he said. "But I was wrong. I just hadn't seen the full design yet." He paused, letting the hush settle around his words. "Buildings are more than beams and brick. They're containers for our hardest moments and our best memories. I didn't build this place, but I fought for it, because I believe the people who live in it deserve more than survival. They deserve to be seen." He looked over at Madeline, who had tears in her eyes but didn't look away. And someone who had every reason to walk away, chose to stay, chose to fight beside us, not above us. He raised Lily's drawing. "This isn't a blueprint," he said, "but it's the clearest plan I've ever seen." Laughter, applause, a few tears. Later that night, back at Monroe, the courtyard was strung with lights. Families gathered in clusters with hot cider and wool blankets. Kids made snow angels near the mural Lily had painted, now preserved behind clear panels. Ethan stood with Madeline on the edge of it all, watching the building glow from within. "Greg finally stepped down," she said quietly. "Board elected a new majority, ones who see the long term, ones who value community." Ethan nodded. "What about you?" She looked up at him. "I'm staying. Here. With the people who taught me how to lead." Lily ran over then, breathless cheeks pink with cold. "Can we light the tree now?" Ethan looked to the center of the courtyard where an old pine had stood neglected for years. Now it was wrapped in string lights, donated ornaments, and handwritten notes from tenants, notes of hope, of memory, of names no longer forgotten. He knelt beside Lily and handed her the cord. "Go ahead," he said. "You've earned it." She plugged it in. The lights flickered, then bloomed into brilliance. The crowd erupted in cheers. Madeline reached for Ethan's hand, and this time he didn't hesitate. He held it firmly, fingers laced with hers. "You did it," she whispered. He shook his head. "We did. And we're just getting started." That night, as snow began to fall again, the Monroe building stood quietly beneath it all. Not perfect, not finished, but reborn. Because sometimes the best kind of love doesn't arrive with grandeur. Sometimes it shows up in a storm. Sometimes it sleeps on your couch. Sometimes it teaches you how to rebuild a wall, and sometimes it teaches you how to tear one down. Not every second chance begins with forgiveness. Some begin with faith. Some begin with a door that stays open. And some, like this one, begin with a single act of kindness that refuses to end. Because the building was never just about shelter. It was always about the people who never stopped choosing to stay. Together. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below and let us know what part of the story touched you the most. If this story moved you, inspired you, or simply made you smile, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories just like this. Thank you so much for watching. Your time, your support, and your kindness mean the world to us. See you in the next story.